Sup clowns, Jester of the Moon here, and I need to do something real quick. Just 1 second, bear with me. Yes. After all these years, I've decided to finally cover this from the grave. The dirt nap was probably nice for you, but now I'm about to give you a rude awakening.
5 hours of dragging a coffin with commentary material in it later.
Phew. Well, that was a lot more work than I thought. Kinda bullshit.
You do grave robbery? Can I join?
No, because, fuck you, I do grave robbery alone when I want to, that's why. Also, what are you doing in my house?
You left the door open.
Well, you aren't the first person to do that. I should honestly get some better security because this is just fucking annoying. Anyway, I don't mind you staying to watch this though. I mean, this place is the circus, the land of the funny haha. Alright, let's crack this bitch open. Well, today's topic is a video made by the Game Theorist, more specifically a video from 10 years ago, hence the grave digging, called Game Theory is linked at a Majora's Mask. One more thing before getting into this video, any bouts of anger and pot shots I make throughout this video aren't exactly meant to be an attack on MatPat or PBG, and it's just for entertainment, as this video is a decade old, and obviously he's probably gotten better with time. Also, spoiler alerts for the 24-year-old game. Without any further ado, let's get right into this!
Yeah,
there's Clocktown, Woodfall, Snowhead, Akana Valley, and Great Bay, not in that order.
so each area... Wait, hold on, let me get this out of the way here. Ugh. Give us some room to breathe. As I was saying, each area in the game features some aspect of loss, right? But the way the game's NPCs handle these losses differ from one location to the next. In fact, how the characters handle their personal losses and the order in which you confront them perfectly match up with what's known as the Kubler-Ross model of grief, which basically says that when someone is confronted with death, they go through 5 very distinct emotional phases: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. DABDA for short. Link's adventure starts in Clocktown, where all the people are in denial. Notice how, even though there's a moon that's going to crash into the world, killing everyone in 3 days, no one seems to care. In fact, they're planning a carnival. Take a quick peek into the mayor's office and you see Muto the carpenter calling anyone who's scared a coward, saying that the falling moon is just a groundless theory.
Hey, wait a minute. Where the fuck's the other bit of dialogue? You know, from the guards, where they are actively protesting the carnival from taking place due to the moon crashing, and where they also bring up the concern of tourists not showing up to Clocktown, or mentioning the townsfolk taking shelter before even hearing the mayor's orders and such. Matter of fact, here's a cutscene in full. Cutting parts of context to make your theories seem like they have more ground to stand on really ain't a good idea, and yes, while Muto is absolutely in denial and being a stubborn ass, the rest of the townsfolk, soldiers included, are clearly concerned about the moon. Furthermore, that's the other main driving force of the Couples Mask side quest where Anju and Kaifei try to reunite to marry each other before the moon crashes. Ultimately, you could have phrased your argument better here.
A game thief! Nope, still not yet. Appreciate the enthusiasm though, but still no. Still not yet.
Oh, and there's the Swordmaster, who even says he's gonna slice the moon into pieces. Not the most effective strategy.
A perfect example of denial, or stage 1 of the Kubler-Ross model.
But you're also forgetting the fact that the Swordmaster is also cowardly, because while yes, he does say that he'll cut the moon into pieces, you can find him later on in the final day after he kicks you out of his dojo to go focus his spirit. And as the last 5 minutes pass on the final day, you can re-enter and find a sign saying he's taken vacation, and if you cut the sign at the back of the dojo, there he is, cowering in fear, not wanting to die. And again, like the previous interjection, here's that sequence of events. So now that the evidence is here, there's also the fact that these events happen at the final day! And considering how sudden this shift in tone is as well, would prove the opposite of being in denial. Especially since the Swordmaster fucking acknowledges the moon's existence, unlike Mr. Dumbfuck over here! The other thing too to note is that the Swordmaster also acts as a tutorial for sword combat in Majora's Mask, for the first 2 days anyways. It's less being in denial and, well, the game just being a game and giving a tutorial in this case.
Then there's the Deku Palace in Woodfall. Here, the princess has gone missing. And how does the Deku King respond? Obviously by raging against a monkey. Man, monkey abuse just seems to be a thing around here lately.
Oh, don't worry. I'll be coming back to this much later. Just not today.
Anyway, he jumps to the conclusion that this monkey is the culprit and must die as a punishment. The thing is, the monkey's innocent. The Deku King is just angry, lashing out at anything and anyone because he doesn't know what else to do. And thus we see the second stage of grief manifested.
You mad, bro? Yes, he is. Stage 3, I got this. Snowhead features the Gorons, a tribe who just lost their leader, Darmani. When you meet his ghost, he begs Link to use his magic to bring him back to life. He's bargaining. Darmani is actively trying to make a deal to prolong his life just a little longer, thinking that Link can provide some backdoor solution to the inevitability of his death.
And when those bargains fail, you get depressed. Stage 4. This is when a person realizes that there's no escape and that there's nothing that they can do, so they instead retreat inward, disconnecting from the world. And it's at the Great Bay that Link meets Lulu, a Zora who's lost her eggs. She's a mother who's lost her children, and Kochi just stands there, staring out into the distance, silent. And finally, Link makes his way to Icona Valley, a valley filled with death, sure, but also a place of acceptance. First, you have Sharp, one of 2 composer brothers who you help come to terms with his mistreatment of his sibling, but also, more symbolically,
Wait a dim a darn second here, you're going over how the Kubler-Ross stages of grief apply to each of the locations and plot points of Majora's Mask. But you know what you haven't gotten to yet? Come on, I'll let y'all guess. No guesses? Damn, alright, tough crowd. It's the fucking theory of Link being dead! Bro, how are you not on topic this early? And how have you not been on topic for this long?
have the Stone Tower Temple, which has you climbing upwards towards the heavens and obtaining enlightenment, here illustrated by the item of the dungeon being the light arrows. Link has journeyed through the Valley of Death, passed through the other 4 stages, and here he ascends into acceptance.
There's even the Garo Master, a creature that is described as emptiness cloaked in darkness. If this game is all about overcoming grief, fighting this guy is a pretty literal interpretation. He even commits suicide once you defeat him, an enemy who refuses to accept death on anyone's terms but his own.
Yes, let me take a nice stretch. 1, 2... Ah! Fuck! On a real note, how is the light arrow or the Stone Tower Temple meant to embody enlightenment? You aren't really ascending to the heavens, you're just scaling the tower. It doesn't reach that far up into the sky, unlike you. Also, to my knowledge, there also isn't some kind of heaven and termina to begin with, and on the enlightenment part, it really doesn't hold much water, especially since enlightenment is not really the whole point of the stages of grief. It's a matter of accepting one's own mortality while grieving somebody else's death, and accepting said steps of said death. That being said, this would also make the whole spiel about it being Link grieving his own death that you go on about later just flat out wrong, which later on they do try to make it about Navi for a moment before shifting it back to Link. Don't stretch, you might break your back like I did, and you might also make a point that shoots you in the foot later. Post point Jarbo here, you shot yourself in the foot again, because you do talk about how the Garo Master refuses to accept death on terms other than his own. Now, this might seem fine until you realize that even with the Garo Master dying on his own terms, it's still the lack of accepting one's own loss to begin with. Also, this is just stretching on y'all's end because, let's be real, the Garo Master really only blew himself up because he's a sore loser. It's not that deep.
And when you really stop to think about the whole repeating 3 days gameplay mechanic, that, in essence, is how grief can feel. Like you're trapped in time and can't move forward. It paralyzes you from moving on with your life.
This grief theory does make a lot of sense, but what is Link grieving? I don't see why you'd say he's dead. The game starts off with him roaming the Lost Woods in search of Navi, who flew away at the end of Ocarina of Time. Why anyone would bother searching for her is beyond me, but Link is a weird kid, so whatever.
God motherfucking damn! That's harsh. I get that this is a joke, but at the same time, the reason why Link would even be searching for Navi in the first place is really simple. It's because Navi was really the only person throughout the entirety of Ocarina of Time to remain by Link's side, and is also the only other person other than Zelda who remembers what Link went through when traveling back and forth through time. And for her to suddenly leave obviously struck a chord in him because he clearly misses his only real friend, especially highlighted by the fact he can't really come back to the Kokiri Forest since he's not a Kokiri, cementing the feeling of loss and isolation Link feels.
Wouldn't it make more sense for him to be grieving over her loss? Maybe she died, or maybe he's just sad about losing her.
My guy, my peanut butter in Christ.
That's exactly what it is! So what's the point of you saying you wouldn't know why? No, I'm not gonna have another mental breakdown in a commentary. I'm gonna try to do better. But really though, the other thing too is that this isn't a maybe she died, it's actually she didn't die, because all Navi even does in the first place in the end of Ocarina of Time is just fly off somewhere else, just leaving Link. We never really get much of an indication of Navi dying anyway, hence the other reason why Link would even be trying to find her in the first place. It really wouldn't make any sense for Link to be looking for Navi if she died right in front of him.
Yeah, maybe. But in my mind, there's more evidence to suggest something even darker. I propose to you that throughout Majora's Mask, Link is actually in purgatory, the waiting room of the afterlife, and that the game represents his journey to accept his death and move on.
Well, you know, I didn't think I'd have to do this, but I think now it's especially egregious. It has taken you half the runtime of this 12-minute and 45-second video to get to the fucking point. Good lord.
First, look at the name of the place, Termina. That's not even subtle, Nintendo. Termina, like terminal, the end, it's a pretty big red flag. Then look at how Link finds this place. Isn't it a bit strange that Link is falling down through a tree trunk into what equates to practically a whole new country, with its own astronomically themed nightmare fuel that apparently no one in Hyrule knows about? I mean, planet Earth is a really big place, significantly bigger than Hyrule, but whether you're in Spokane or Djibouti, you know how many moons we have. Really, I ask the question, where is this place supposed to be located?
Underground?
Then how is there a sky? And remember, Link supposedly fell a really long way to end up here. If that's the case though, he would have died. Granted, there's a lot of creative license in these games, don't get me wrong, but Nintendo has always taken falling very seriously in 3D Zeldas. Even the animation that happens while you fall feels a bit surreal, like a bad LSD trip ripped straight out of Alice in Wonderland, which, spoiler alert, ends up being all a bad dream.
And now that you mention it, where did Epona go? You see them run into this tree, and I guess they could just jump from one stump to the next, but does Epona also live through that huge fall? Even if she does, Skull would have to transport her over this water, through this cave door, and over these deadly platforms, all for her to end up at Romani Ranch later in the game. And he'd have to do that all before Link arrives so that he'd be ready to hover there all cool and Magneto-like.
Okay. Finally. The part I've been wanting to rebut this whole fucking time. Now, we'll go over each thing here individually because there is definitely quite a bit to get through. Alright, first thing here. So, now you're just straight up ignoring how the setting of Termina even works to try and have a better means of proving your theory. To be more specific, MatPat is ignoring the elephant in the room that canonically Termina is a parallel world to Hyrule. A parallel world, for those who may be unaware, is kinda like a separate universe which runs along the main universe. Furthermore, this is proven in Hyrule Historia, a book released the same year as this video. And in addition, Hyrule Historia's Northern American release even predates this video as it was released on January 29th, 2013, and this game theory episode came out on November 9th, 2013. Good lord, I know how to hold grudges, that's for sure. In any case, though, this makes it clear that MatPat didn't really bother to try and look into the lore to see if his theory had any real ground to stand on. Now, to be a little bit fair to the guy, maybe it had been a while since he had last played Majora's Mask. Even then, though, I'd argue that he should have at least replayed the game and paid attention to the story from the central plots to the side quests. Because even with just replaying the game, you can very easily come to the conclusion that Termina is a parallel world that is obviously strange in its nature. And if anything, Link falling down from that weird tree is the most normal thing really about this game. Second thing, as far as the moon is concerned, it has already been shown in-game, mind you, that the moon is actually a construct of Majora that was placed upon Termina by Majora. And this is further confirmed since not only are you able to travel inside the moon, which is a reflection of how they view people in the world, but also confirmed by the fact that when you beat Majora and save Termina, the moon disappears along with them. Also, this ties back to Termina being a parallel world, and part of that is being able to contain other beings or things that just wouldn't be able to be underground. You know, like multiple countries that have radically different climates, the sky, the sun, the moon, and just everything. In short, it is able to do all these seemingly impossible things because everything is in a vacuum. Third thing here, about the fall damage, that can easily be explained by using the same logic you present. That, of course, being the game's physics, where if you fall from a great height and land on a Deku Flower, you take, drumroll please, 0 fall damage! Ultimately, you can't really try to bring up one aspect of the game's physics while completely ignoring another that also happens to be shown in the same set of cutscenes you're talking about. Now, with all that being said, this is proof Link did not die and survived the fall, therefore debunking Link's death. Fourth thing, and this is admittedly minor but should still be addressed, considering that Majora's Mask possesses many different capabilities with its powers and we weren't exactly shown all of them, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that Skull Kid was able to bring down Epona quickly to Romani Ranch and make it back in time. We also don't know how long the fall Link took was exactly either, considering the game makes jump cuts from Link falling, to the weird collage of the mask icons, to then Link landing onto the Deku Flower. So for all we know, the fall could have been longer than shown, which could have also given Skull Kid and co enough time to do all of that really, since it looks like a pretty big drop.
It does seem pretty suspicious.
Like it can't be real! Exactly! And that's also why most of the people you see throughout Termina are identical copies of the ones you met during your Ocarina of Time journey. Link's personal purgatory, his journey to accept his death, is populated with people he's encountered before.
Like I've said in my previous interjection, Termina is in fact a parallel world to Hyrule. That being said, there's also the tidbit from outside the game and lore as well that I promise you has relevance. Majora's Mask was originally supposed to be an expansion pack to Ocarina of Time called Urizelda, and would use the failed console add-on on the Nintendo 64 disc drive. Long story short, Urizelda was in development hell, and it didn't take long for the N64 DD to flop, and so this led to a change in development over to the base Nintendo 64. Shigeru Miyamoto, who is the series creator, wanted to try and repurpose Urizelda to a version of Ocarina of Time with remixed dungeons and enemies dealing double damage, dubbing it the Second Quest. Eiji Aonuma, the director of the Zelda series, however wanted to make a new game instead. Miyamoto was fine with Aonuma wanting to create a new game instead, but it had to be under two conditions. The first condition was that the game had to be developed with a new team reusing the Ocarina of Time engine and assets. The second, and by far the most downright challenging, was to create the game in the span of 1 year. Yes, you heard me right, 1 year! And so, with those conditions, Aonuma had to also figure out a way to explain in the lore why a lot of the assets and such returned from Ocarina of Time, which is of course that Termina is a parallel world. All of this is actually why we see a lot of the same characters, not because Link is in purgatory seeing everyone he's met as if his life is flashing before his eyes in some sort of way.
You have reached the phone of Gino Fratelli. I'm not here right now, and if this is Kanjin, hang up. I don't want to talk to you.
Now, I want to preface my upcoming interjections because I was able to debunk this theory on the previous interjection. At this point, any further interjections are me just entertaining the thoughts of the rest of this video. Alright, with that being said, we will now return to your regular scheduled programming of funny bullshit.
He's like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And you were there, and you were there, and you were there.
And consider the masks. The transformation masks all represent characters who have died. There's Darmani the Goron, whose ghost appears to you, Mikau the Zora guitarist, who actually dies in front of you, and although it's never actually said, the Deku mask is most likely this little sprout, the deceased child of the Deku butler. Knowing that these different transformations are Link assuming the forms of deceased characters, turn your attention to this, the Elegy of Emptiness. It's a song you get late in the game that allows you to create statue clones of your current form. In a lot of ways, they're like funeral effigies, standing there as a memorial to the dead. Now, if the only masks that allow you to create a clone using this song are the ones that are related to dead people, and Link is somehow able to create a clone of himself, that would seem to mean... What would that mean?
Your point about how the status is created by the Elegy of Emptiness is correct. However, you missed one small but very important detail that pokes a hole through this theory. Take a look at Link's statue in comparison to the other statue. Notice anything? If not, I don't blame you, all of them are equally fucking creepy. The detail I'm talking about in this is how Link's statue looks, particularly its facial expression, which is a toothy smile with its eyes still there and as bright as can be. Unlike the other three, which are shown to be with a visual expression of anguish in Mikau and Darmani's case, or sorrow in the implied son of the Deku Butlers. Hey, Postboy Jorbo here. I figured I should also mention something. So, with the Deku Elegy of Emptiness statue, yes, there is still coloration in its eyes. However, like I said, its expression is rather, glum. So, again, it still conveys that a loss happened. Some sort of, like, death occurred.
Waiting on you.
And that actually makes sense in the timeline, too.
Okay, we'll keep moving on then.
Well, Majora's Mask comes before Twilight Princess according to the official Zelda timeline, right? And in Twilight Princess, there's the hero Shade, a Stalfos-looking creature who has officially been confirmed in Hyrule Historia as the spirit of the hero of time, aka Link in Majora's Mask. And just in case you doubt they're one and the same, he's left-handed like Link, and most of the songs he uses come from Ocarina and Majora. Anyway, Zelda lore states that those who become lost in the woods are fated to become a Stalfos. Although I accepted life as the hero, I could not convey the lessons of that life to those who came after. At last, I have eased my regrets. So the hero of time is somehow prevented from teaching others his ways. And that begs the question, why? Why would this hero who has conquered both evil and time have such profound regrets? Could it be that he died prematurely? Could it be that he died in the Lost Woods becoming a Stalfos? Could it be?
So, I can certainly see the premise you might be going with here for sure, but there's a few issues with it. The first and probably the most major issue is how you make the assumption of where or even how Link died in the first place. Never is it outright stated he died in the Lost Woods at all, nor is it really implied, unless you consider him meeting you for the first time in front of the Forest Temple in Twilight Princess. But even then, that can obviously be chalked up to another tutorial thrown in to give Link the ending blow sword skill, and it makes sense from a game design standpoint to introduce the hero Shade before the first dungeon, considering it gives you a sword skill to use in the dungeon and also sets up the mechanic of learning sword skills from the hero Shade. Listen, as much as I love delving into the lore aspect of things, there are times where I think we should remember that this is a fucking video game. And also, if anything, there can be two things gathered just from looking at the hero Shade character design. The first being more minor, with how he's a lot more ghostly looking than say a Stalfos, with the only real thing resembling such is his face being skeletal, which could be chalked up to adding some interesting and spooky visual flair to a ghostly type of character. The second thing is, if we look at him too, you can clearly see he's adorned with weathered and battle-damaged armor. This would imply that perhaps the hero of time died in a war or a battle of some sort. Also, if Link really did become a Stalfos, then why would a spirit in the overworld be represented by a golden wolf instead of a Stalfos? It just doesn't make any sense, and once again proves you ignore other bits of context and info so you can make it look like your theory has more ground to stand on when it doesn't when said bits are acknowledged. As for his profound regrets, I think it can be easily understood why Link has them in the first place. He was robbed of his childhood in Ocarina of Time, and the duty of hero was forced onto him. Link is 9 in Ocarina of Time, for fuck's sakes. That already has a pretty heavy burden to carry as an adult, let alone a child. And furthermore, since this is the child timeline, this means he was sent back in time after defeating Ganondorf, meaning all the trials and tribulations Link had to go through were effectively erased and forgotten by everyone except him, Navi, and Zelda. And to basically have all that pain and strife mean nothing would definitely make him feel regretful of the fact that he couldn't really pass on his lessons because he wouldn't have been able to be taken seriously due to everything that happened in Ocarina of Time being effectively retconned. That being said, I think this proves more than enough that it wasn't because he turned into a Stalfos, and also proves that Ocarina of Time is a fucking tragic game. Holy shit. Hey, Pulse Point Jorbo, I figured I'd chime in because I also just remembered that only adults who become lost and die in the Lost Woods become Stalfos, and that children become Skull Kids. With that being said, this also eviscerates this whole point as well because Link is a child in Majora's Mask, and it would be impossible for Link to go from being a Skull Kid to a Stalfos because they are distinctly separate creatures. This is confirmed directly in Hyrule Historia.
Probably.
It's also worth pointing out that the hero Shade saying "believe in your strength" directly mirrors what the Happy Mask salesman says to Link throughout Majora's Mask: believe in your strengths. And speaking of the Happy Mask salesman, he provides what I think is the strongest proof of this theory. Do you happen to remember the first line he says to you in the game?
You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?
When he says this to you at the beginning of the game, you assume he means Link being turned into a Deku shrub, right? That's just what happened, but that line actually repeats again later in the game. Every time you let the moon crash towards Earth, the animation shows the moon destroying Clocktown, Link getting consumed by fire, then you hear the Happy Mask salesman's laugh and see this line. The terrible fate isn't being turned into a scrub, it's Link dying. Why else would Nintendo choose to repeat that particular line at that particular instant?
Okay, two things. The first thing being the believe in your strength line that both the hero Shade and the Happy Mask salesman say. This is just a complete nothing burger. Both instances are merely points of where they are giving positive affirmation to Link. There really isn't much to try and base your theory off of other than the fact that the line is said very similarly. Second thing to note here is the "you've met with a terrible fate, haven't you" line, because it definitely does apply to Link being turned into a Deku Scrub by Skull Kid, but as for the part where you bring up letting the moon crash, it just wouldn't be canon at all, because if it was, then the ending of Majora's Mask just wouldn't have ever happened. As for why Nintendo would choose that line for that instant, it's simple, because the terrible fate Link is being met with is his own failure to save Termina and himself in the process, not because it's means of proof that Link has been dead the whole time.
Yeah, I I got nothing. So him riding off into the fog at the end is Link accepting his fate and moving on?
Nope!
Why are you buying clothes at the soup store? Fuck you!
Alrighty, we've made it to our final thoughts, and quite honestly, I have by far the most shit-eating grin my face could ever bestow to this earth. The reason why I do is quite simple. I have pretty much never liked this video, and I've always thought it was wrong even back when it was released. Oh, and
just to be sure that I make this clear for the potential dumbasses, no, this doesn't mean I'm acting in bad faith, but it means that this is a video I wanted to make for a long time.
That's right, 8-year-old Jorbo didn't like this video in the slightest. Granted, back then, I didn't exactly have the right words and such to explain it in much detail, but hey, now I can. These final thoughts will be less of suggestions to improve, considering since, like I've said before in this video is a decade old, and more of a summary of the problems that are just in the video in general. The thing I have noticed time and fucking time again was both MatPat and PBG flat out ignoring other bits of context, lore, and gameplay mechanics to try and prove their point, but then having no issue applying other bits of context, lore, and gameplay mechanics to prove their point while still missing the extra context. This is just incredibly poor form when going about presenting your evidence for your theory, because you're trying to bury the very visible holes within it, and it comes off as deceptive because you're actively lying by omission. And I think what boggles my mind even more is the fact that you even had no issue using Hyrule Historia when going over the hero shade in the child timeline, but somehow didn't see the evidence regarding Termina being a parallel world, or even the evidence that also says that only adults can become Stalfos and children can only become Skull Kids when being lost in the Lost Woods. Speaking of the hero shade, I find it hilarious that for someone who tried to look incredibly deep into Majora's Mask for their evidence that they couldn't figure out the details when they were in plain sight, more particularly with the character design of the hero shade, which would prove the opposite of Link dying in the Lost Woods, considering the weathered and battle-damaged armor, which if anything would actually imply Link died in some kind of war or battle after Majora's Mask, which would just also prove that he didn't die there. And while on the subject of the Hero Shade character design, we should also turn our attention to the Hero Shade overworld form, which is shown to be a golden wolf and not a Stalfos, which last time I checked, Stalfos can really only be in the physical plane and aren't ghosts of any kind, and with its first appearance being outside of the Forest Temple makes perfect sense since you learn the finishing low sword skill, which is the first sword skill you'll learn, so it makes sense to have it be learned before the first dungeon so you can use it. Now, the other thing that is single-handedly the funniest hole in this theory that is a smoking gun is the Deku Flowers, since it is able to soften any fall and makes it so you take no fall damage, and since MatPat thought Link dies because of fall damage, the Deku Flower outright negates this point, and in addition is right there in the very same sequence of events to break Link's fall. Now, summary aside, there's something else I've been wanting to say. I think the issue with how MatPat makes his theories in this era can best be described in an analogy. It goes something like this. A solid theory is like a table. The tabletop itself is the theory, and the legs are the solid supporting evidence that the theory is able to stand on. A bad theory, or I'll just say it flatly, a conspiracy theory, is like a tabletop supported by tabletops. In short, a theory supported with other theories rather than actual evidence. And while these videos are by no means the most serious things on the planet, I still think if you're gonna make a theory, you gotta have some solid evidence to back it up. And truthfully, no matter how solid a theory is, there is always going to be small holes in it. It's just a matter of minimizing them in the first place. Anyways, I think this is where my final thoughts end. I honestly had a lot of fun delving into my hyperfixation on Zelda and putting that to good use for this commentary. If you liked what you saw, feel free to check out the groups I'm a part of in the description, and if you want to, leave a like and a subscribe. Other than that, bye-bye!